Welcome to the Unreal BootCamp lesson on anonymous authentication. You'll want to use anonymous authentication in your app when you don't want to bother the user with a login screen but still have access to brainCloud features. To start, we'll navigate to the API reference. The API reference is a great source of information for all things brainCloud. It contains all the requests that the brainCloud client can make. On the left, navigate to the brainCloud wrapper's authenticate anonymous request. Scroll down and notice that there's a source code sample for each request in the API reference. The source code sample even allows you to change the programming language that you are using. Below that, click the JSON response. The JSON response is an example of the data that gets returned on a successful authentication response. Open the Unreal editor. We're going to create a new C++ class to help keep our brainCloud responses organized. Under C++ classes, in the Space Shooter folder, right-click and then select New C++ class. Select None for the parent class. Name the class Network Callback Handler. Once Unreal finishes compiling the source code, head in text code and open the network callback handler.h file. At the top, include iServerCallback.h. This is a brainCloud header file that is used to specify an interface for handling the response of a brainCloud request. Add the iServerCallback as a base class to the network callback handler class. The purpose of the network callback handler class is to simplify and organize the network manager class and the brainCloud responses that it gets. Delete the generated destructor and in its place declare a pair of callback delegates. One is called success callback and the other one is called failure callback. Declare a pair of private methods. These methods are overridden from the iServerCallback class. Navigate to the network callback handler.cpp file. Just a note, I have a non-standard hotkey setup to jump to the CPP file automatically. At the top, add a pair of include directives for the service name and the service operation. Delete the generated destructor and in its place implement the server callback method. In the body, check to see if the server callback is bound. If it is, invoke it and pass in the JSON data as the argument. Implement the server error method. In the body, check to see if the failure callback delegate is bound. If it is, invoke it and pass in the status code, the reason code, and the JSON error as the arguments. Navigate to the network callback.h file. This class is meant to be the callback interface for the network manager class. Declare a pair of virtual methods that will be invoked on either a successful or failed authentication request. A bit later in this lesson, we'll override the onAuthentication request completed method in the Space Shooter game mode base class to handle a successful authentication request. Navigate to the network manager.h file. At the top, include network callback handler.h. Next, declare a public method called request anonymous authentication. Declare a pair of private callback functions. Make sure to mark the methods as a U function with the callback category, as these methods will be invoked from the network callback handler's delegates that we just wrote. Finally, declare a private network callback handler object. Navigate to the network manager's constructor and bind the private callback methods we just declared to the callback handler success and failure delegates. Implement the isAuthenticated method. In the body, return whether brainCloud is authenticated or not. Now we're going to implement the network manager's request anonymous authentication method. We'll invoke brainCloud's authenticate anonymous request, passing in the address of the authentication callback object. After that, we'll implement the onAuthentication callback method. We'll log a message along with the JSON data. And if set, we'll invoke the callback's onAuthentication request completed method. Finally, implement the onAuthentication error method. Log the error. And if set, we'll invoke the callback's onAuthentication request failed method, passing along a brief error message. We'll expand on the error message for a failed authentication in a future bootcamp lesson. Open the Space Shooter game mode base.h file. At the top, include the network callback. Add the network callback as a base class to the Space Shooter game mode base. Then, add a public method called handle authentication. Finally, override the network callback's onAuthentication request completed method. In the Space Shooter game mode base's constructor, After the network manager has been instantiated, invoke the network's setCallback method, passing in this pointer as the argument. Scroll down and find the beginPlay method. Delete the last 2 lines of this method. In their place, invoke the handle authentication method that we're about to write. Scroll down. After the tick method, write the handle authentication method. This method will evolve substantially over the next few lessons. But for this lesson, set the game state to authenticating, show the connecting dialog, and invoke the network manager's request anonymous authentication method. Finally, we're going to implement the onAuthenticationRequest completed method. Inside the body, we'll set the game state to loading data, hide the connecting dialog, and show the main menu. Stop the editor from running, and then click the Run button. In the Unreal editor, run the game. Notice that we display the connecting screen followed by the main menu. That means that we've successfully authenticated with brainCloud. We now have an active brainCloud session and are ready to make additional brainCloud requests. Reconnect authentication is the next lesson in the Unreal BootCamp.